Ledger is a writing podcast and a passionate soliloquy about many things, not always Star Wars, but sometimes. I'm your host, Austin Wilson. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is Bella Poynton. She's a playwright, director, actor, and theater scholar who's currently the director of the Playwrights Wing at First Look Buffalo Theater Company in Buffalo, New York. As I mentioned in the show, I first encountered Bella's work in the Best American Short Plays 2018 through 2019, a collection of short plays edited by John Patrick Bray. Specifically, Bella's short play, 11 Things That Almost Happened to Rick and Hannah, and One Thing That Actually Did, which we talk about briefly at the beginning of the interview. Bella has done a lot of stuff, specifically plays. She's the first official playwright that I've gotten the chance to talk to, and she has a lot of awesome accomplishments that really excited me so that we could chat about. She's also the literary manager for Post-Industrial Productions and is also the director of Queen City Playwrights, which is Buffalo, New York's new play development workshop for career playwrights in Western New York. She's had her work published in the Best 10-Minute Plays of 2019, the aforementioned Best American Short Plays 2018 through 2019, also a book called The Weirdest Plays of 2020. So that kind of gives you a glimpse into what she's done. She's been the finalist for the Christopher Brian Wolk Playwriting Award, the Heidemann Award, the Sam French OOB Festival. She knows what she's talking about when it comes to plays, which is the reason why I wanted to chat with her. She writes some really intriguing and memorable stuff, speculative, sci-fi, fantasy, some not, but she's written things like a play about Medusa called Medusa Undone. Speed of Light is another play that's about an alien invasion. She was writing stuff that really challenged what I thought of as the theater, and that's one of the things that I wanted to chat with her about. We do talk about writing and how she does some of the things that she does, but we also kind of end up transitioning to just chat about theater in general. I don't really think it's a bad thing, honestly, because as we discuss in the interview, the writing of a play isn't really finished until the play is being put on, and even then, is it done being written? That's one of the questions that we end up talking about, thinking of things that you would want to put on stage and how you make it happen, and whether or not certain stage directions are impossible, and what you do as a production team, a director, a playwright, the actors, when you have stage directions that are seemingly impossible. One of the ones that Bella brings up is, and then the world explodes and rains down glitter on everyone. How do you do that on stage? And she discusses that, and we go through what it takes to make a play happen and what it's like to write a play. I'm insanely excited I got the chance to chat with her and that you can hear it now. Make sure you check out all of Bella's work. Go to bellapoynton.com. That's where you can find her entire resume, all the information about her. You can find, I think, links to her plays that you can download and read if you want to. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. Thank you to Bella for coming on and chatting with me. As always, you can find my work at austinrwilson.com. I'm on Twitter for now, AustinRWilson and Ledger_podcast. You can also go check out the YouTube channel for the podcast. There's no video. It's just going to be the podcast audio, but I'm going to be putting up every episode on there as I do them. So this one will be on there. You might even be listening to it there right now. Who knows? Something kind of new, go to medium.com/shibboleth, except instead of an L in shibboleth, it's an I. Someone already had shibboleth, and there's nothing on the URL, so that's kind of upsetting. But I'm going to be posting all my new shibboleth stories on that site and really try to use Medium more to get my stuff out to other people. So if you are on Medium, I would love for you to follow me. I'm also at Austin R. Wilson on Medium and kind of every other place. Also, this is cool. Ahoy Comics has a Discord channel now. You can find the link on their Twitter or my Twitter, and that's where I'll be hanging out sometimes. If you want to come over and chat to some of the other people that have created things for Ahoy Comics, swing by there. Thank you again for listening. And my story. I have two stories in Love Me, Love Me Not, a collection of short shorts out from Black Hair Press. It's now officially available to buy. They are all Valentine's Day stories. I mean, they're about love, ostensibly, but they're all dark. I have 2 stories in that collection, so make sure you check the links in the show notes wherever you're listening to this, either there or my website or Twitter, wherever, and grab a copy of Love Me Not, and read some dark tales of love, lust, and lunacy, which is one of the subtitles for the book. But as for now, check out this interview with Bella Poynton, and we'll catch you on the tail end of it. The first time I ever encountered your work was in the Best American Short Plays, 2018 to 2019.
Wow. Okay.
By John Patrick Bray.
Yeah.
You wrote a play called 11 Things That Almost Happened to Rick and Hannah and One Thing That Actually Did. You're the first playwright that I've been able to talk to officially. I'm sure other people maybe wrote some plays, but you're the first official playwright. That play specifically, how would you describe that play? Because I read that play and I was like, man, I'm going to be thinking about this for a little bit. And that led to me looking at more of your work and emailing you. So how would you describe that play to someone who has no idea about it?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. And second of all, shout out to John Patrick Bray, who's fantastic and does a lot of editing of anthologies and helps kind of get new work out into the community, into the theater community. So yay for him, and thank you to him. But yeah, so 11 Things That Happened to Rick and Hannah is like half a joke and half about me and a real friend that I have. I actually haven't. There was a period in my life when he and I were much closer than we are right now. That's for no other reason than just like life stuff. Like we kind of like went in different directions. But like if he were to text me right now, I'd be like, yeah, let's meet for coffee. And his name is actually Rick. My name is not Hannah, but he was just such an interesting character, and we would like try to meet, and he would be very late, and he would like always have a new job and like never be in the same spot, and like then would disappear for 5 months, and he'd be like, I was living in Nova Scotia and now I'm back, and like and like his life was always just a mystery to me. He took me out hiking once. He like insisted that we go hiking. He like, and I say this because I'm like very boring. I'm like, I am teaching and then I go home and like make dinner and like go to bed. Like, so he's very exciting, and like he did some theater work at one point. But it's always new, right? It's always something new with him. And I was like, how do I write about this a little bit? It's not a full-length play. It's just kind of an idea, right? Yeah. It's like a little one-act snippet of maybe something that happens to you in your life. And then at the same time, I was just joking with a friend of mine about, like I wanted to kind of do like a, you might not know who this is. You probably don't know who this is. Christopher, oh gosh, the name is escaping me now. I have to look it up because I'm like on the spot. David Ives. I'm sorry, not Christopher. I was thinking of something. David Ives is a playwright who wrote this play called All in the Timing. It's a collection of like one acts. It's very, very famous amongst theater people. And there's this one play where like this timer goes off, and every time the timer goes off, like the play restarts. And I was joking with a friend of mine. We kind of both love the actor Liam Neeson a lot, and like we were kind of like just like joking, and I was saying I should write a play about like 25 things I would say to Liam Neeson if I met him. And so I kind of started writing this funny play where like I walk into a coffee shop and see Liam Neeson and like say something to him, and then a bell goes off and I get to come in again and say something else to him, and then a bell goes off and I get to come in again. It didn't really work as a play because it had no it has no like crisis or like climax, or maybe I'll work on it more, but it did kind of work in this context with Rick and Hannah, because they're fictional, and like there really is a conflict between Rick and Hannah. Like she's trying to like pin him down in some way, and he's kind of all over the place. And they're trying to meet in the middle, and she's much less adventurous. And then they kind of meet finally at the theater where her play is being done, right? And they're able to really kind of talk about that in a real way. So I would say that that play is an experiment I did in absurdism and kind of writing in the style of David Ives a little bit, with my own little twist on it, and my influence from my friend. But it's definitely absurdist. I do teach theater history, so I'm constantly looking at the different movements and being like, oh, this is so interesting. Maybe I want to like experiment with something like this or like that. But it has some absurdity to it, and it's nonlinear and all of that. So that's what I would say about that play. And I think it's so funny that that's the first play of mine that you encountered. Usually that's not how it goes. It's usually a full-length play that people encounter first. But this is great. I'm digging it.
Recently, I have been reading a lot of short stuff, and I wanted to learn more about one-act plays and shorter plays, and that's how I ended up finding that book, because I was like, okay, I want to read contemporary short plays rather than just, okay, here's a one-act play that was written back in the 30s that everybody always talks about. I wanted to read stuff that was written by someone now.
Right.
It's weird because as I was reading it, like you said, it's short, and it's in a book of short plays. The speculative nature of it, and whether this was your intent or not, that was the thing that ended up firing my brain, where I was like, why is this happening? What's going on here that they're repeating this over and over again? And I thought about it a lot, kind of just as an experiment and just a fun way. That's obviously one way that I engage with writing, is just pour over it again and again. But then when I looked your stuff up and saw, oh, you have written a lot of speculative stuff.
Yeah, I have. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, and it all, and now listeners can't see this, but you have all these sci-fi books behind you.
I do.
And with that, I was so interested because I didn't grow up within the theater world. I took drama in high school, but I wasn't in a play. But I've always been interested in plays. Neil Simon was my big like North Star when I was growing up. I still love Neil Simon. But seeing your stuff, the speculative stuff you've, which I'm going to get to the stuff that you've written, but the big thing that made me so excited is that you could write things that people don't immediately think of when they think of stage work. Because from my experience, obviously you're from a different world, but for me, where I grew up in Indiana, if people think of like plays, they think of Broadway and musicals and maybe like intense dramas like The Iceman Cometh and Death of a Salesman and stuff like that. So I was so excited to see your speculative work and be like, oh my gosh, because sci-fi is, I love it. So I want to talk to you about writing plays that are not expected, that is work outside of what somebody would think if they would immediately think of a play. Did you grow up thinking about sci-fi and stage writing together as one?
Yes. So there's so much happening right now. Oh my gosh. So I was raised on science fiction. My father is a scientist, and so I was raised on Star Wars and Star Trek and Dune and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea being read to me, and it was just it was they were my fairy tales. It was my mythology, right? It was the stories that I was given that kind of formulated my identity. So writing sci-fi has no, it's always seemed like, well, of course, that's what you write.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, these stories to me have never seemed odd. They've never seemed over the top. They've never seemed really even speculative, because I was raised on them. So the first great stories that I remember encountering were science fiction stories. So to me, that is what good storytelling kind of is. I mean, I recognize that it doesn't have to be, of course, yes, but they're so foundational. That's a pun. For
I get
me.
it.
They're so foundational that it, you know, it was never, they were never super, well, they were for a period of time separate in my mind because I thought they had to be. Right. So I was raised on science fiction, but very, very early on was interested in the theater. I mean, my mother says that when I was like 3 and 4, I pretended that I was in the circus, and I was like, you know, I'm the ring bearer of, you know, the, you know, pretending that I'm kind of like the master of ceremonies of some kind of show.
Yeah.
So very early on, that was there too. And for a period of time, I did not think that the twain shall meet. Like, I didn't really understand it. I mean, how could you? It's kind of like a little bit of a jump. And the theater won out. I mean, I knew very early on that I wanted to be thought I wanted to be an actor, and I went to acting school. I trained at a conservatory acting school for undergrad, and, you know, worked as an actor for a while. But all during that time, I was also writing plays. I figured out I could write plays very early. I was maybe 12, 14. And I wrote a play. I wrote essentially a full-length play about like a speakeasy in the 1920s run by this woman, and she's like trying to like keep it a secret, and she gets involved with a cop. And like, I was literally 13 years old writing this. And that play that I wrote when I was 13, at the time I was a part of like a youth group at a church, and I printed it out and I gave it to the youth group advisor, and I said, can we do this play? And she gave it to the priest who like ran the church, and he was like, take out the swears and you can do it. And so that was kind of like, I was like, oh, okay, so I can do this too. And that was literally my first experience with like rewriting a play and like workshopping a play. And like all my friends from youth group, we did this really horrible play when we were 12 and 13 years old. And yet it was like an incredibly formative, now like that I look back on it, it was this wildly formative identity building experience for me. I went on to acting school, and while I was in acting school, I had a wonderful teacher. His name was John Lipsky, the late great John Lipsky, and he after speaking to him, he essentially said to me, "You're a playwright." And of course I was kind of like offended, right? I was like, "Oh my gosh, how dare you say such a thing? I'm an actor." Yeah. I thought in many ways, I thought he was saying like, go sit in front of the computer. You don't belong on stage. And that was not what he was saying. He was just saying that he could see in me this other thing. And he really encouraged me to start to hone that. So, and I did all of the resistant things, right? I was like, no, I don't know how to do it. So finally I sat down and I wrote my first full-length play, which is a play called Pope Joan, and another play that I wrote kind of concurrently with Pope Joan called A House Full of Dust, which is a ghost story. Neither of those are sci-fi, although they both have kind of speculative elements in them. Pope Joan is a history play, but it has a lot to do with there's a lot of like magic spirituality going on in Pope Joan that's implied, and then House of Dust is like a ghost. There are like ghosts on stage. There's ghosts. So yeah, things are happening.
Do you think speculatively plays that deal with things like ghosts or I guess more over the top visuals, some people would call them that, is that one of the reasons why that where you were talking about like never the twain shall meet, that sci-fi is so associated with giant ships and lasers and things that as you're putting a production on, you're not going to have a Star Destroyer come onto the stage. Is that a thing that holds, like, at the time when you were writing those plays, did you ever have a moment where you were like, well, I can't write this thing that I have in my head for the stage because it's got robots and holograms in it? And spoiler alert, she has written that, listener. There are those plays now that have those things.
I mean, so, and this is actually what I started to grapple with when I was a little bit older. What is science fiction?
Yes.
And this is partially why I went on and I got my MFA in playwriting and then my PhD in theater and performance studies, because I was like, how do these things function? Very interested in genre studies, very interested in what makes a thing science fiction, what makes it fantasy, what makes it theater, what makes it drama, blah, blah, blah. So essentially what I have come to realize, and what many scholars have written, is that what makes a thing science fiction is not the ships. It's not the explosions. It's not the laser swords, right?
Yeah.
It's not any of those things. It's the nature of the relationships, and it's, according to Darko Suvin, the use of a thing called the novum, and essentially this concept of estrangement and cognition. And I can go through that and kind of talk about what that means. So Darko Suvin right here. Oh no, that's not the Darko. Where is it? That's the wrong book. But it's over there. Okay, anyway. But so Darko Suvin has this book called Metamorphoses of Science Fiction, where he talks about what science fiction is. And it's this estrangement and cognition. So essentially what sci-fi does to you is it estranges you in some way from the world, right? So for example, in a story with time travel, the thing that's estranging us, that's making it different than the world that we're in, is the time travel, right? Because that doesn't exist. And yet somehow, because that exists, the rest of the story has to build our cognition up to that point so that we can understand what's going on. So and he's very influenced by Brecht, who is a theater person, and this idea of making the strange familiar and the familiar strange. So in sci-fi, we're brought into this brand new world in which the familiar becomes strange. So what seems familiar to other people in the world is strange to us, like in Star Trek, right? Warp speed and beaming up and down, right? To us, that's like, oh my God, like, how are all of our atoms going to come back together? It's terrifying. It's existentially terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's unbelievably, and yet they do it all the time.
Oh yeah,
and they're not scared.
It's like walking through a door to them.
Sure, a Stargate, walking through a door, right? That kind of stuff. And that's the novum, right? This thing that makes the world different. And then we are like, oh, it's so mind-boggling. That's the thing that makes a piece sci-fi or not. And people have argued, for Star Wars, for example, what is it that makes Star Wars different than our world? And quite honestly, like, yes, there's laser swords and yes, there's big ships, but we have swords and we have ships, and maybe theirs go a little faster. But really, the thing that makes Star Wars so unbelievably different than our universe is the Force. And the Force is actually a spiritual a spiritual force, right? Like gravity or something. It is, and in many ways, because it's spiritual, you can argue that Star Wars is actually fantasy. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a strong argument to say that Star Wars actually is a fantasy story.
Yeah, I think with having the essentially faith become this like tactile, you can see faith become real in Star Wars.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's what the story has kind of always been about in a way. And on some level is kind of what makes it resonate so much with people, I think, is that like exactly what you just said, like faith becomes you can see it happens. Right? There's proof that there's something larger. And so anyway, so this idea that really it's not the ships and the lasers and the explosions, but the nature of estrangement and cognition, right? The nature of exploring novum, that's what makes something sci-fi. Well, you can do that on stage.
Right.
And and you can do that on stage in really cool ways. It's not about the visualization. It's about visualization. It's about talking about concepts. And really, like, honestly, when I'm watching sci-fi stuff, sometimes I like fast forward through like the fights. Like, I'm not interested. I want to hear them talk about ideas. I want conflict between people. That's not necessarily like, shootouts.
That's why, and I won't let us go too far into Star Wars because I know it could derail the entire podcast and we could just talk about it. Did you watch Andor?
I did.
So I adore that show. I think
great.
it's fantastic. And it's the thing you just said. Fast forward through the fights and like you want to see the conflict and the people talking, like that's what the show is. Mm-hmm. And for me, watching sci-fi that focuses on that, it does go past those things. Like, yeah, there's really cool technology and there's amazing visuals, but the relationships and the social aspect of the story, which you are putting on the stage in your plays, you build this. It's almost like the sci-fi is like insulated by that thing, or maybe vice versa.
Yeah, no, I get it, and there's like I'm thinking of two of my plays right now, but like if they were to be turned into movies, there's ample opportunity to kind of like show the fights that they get in. They're just not in the play because they're not necessary. Like, I'm way more interested in having my characters talk to each other and get at real conflict and real problems and get to the bottom of that than I am in like watching some kind of like space invasion.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because since I've never talked to a playwright before, that was one of my big questions from a writing standpoint, is because, there's all these things that people say about writing screenplays, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. One of the things that I love about theater and playwriting is that combination of auditory and visual storytelling, and the actors. I don't know if this is like a wrong-headed way to think of it, but the actors being the medium, that your words become the story because the actors are bringing them to life. Obviously there's, directors and everyone else helping, put the play on, but you're really writing for someone to speak the words.
Yeah.
Does that affect how you're writing them ever? Like, because that's one thing people talk about. Don't worry about what the audience is going to think. Write your story. But in this case, you're writing for someone else to say the words and bring them to life. And does that affect you as you're writing, thinking about actors having to interpret what you're doing, or how are you contemplating actors turning your words into a performance, if you're even contemplating it?
Yeah, no. So what you said was really quite wonderful and profound, that the actor is the medium, right? So the dialogue is really the medium of theater in many ways. Liveness, right? Being there live, and then dialogue. So dialogue really is the main mode of meaning making that we have in theater. In film, it's not dialogue, right? It's imagery. It's the time image. But I have always gravitated towards language, and what language can do, and what specifically dialogue can do, what can be achieved in a conversation between people. And that is what I thrive writing. That's how I thrive writing. That's the medium through which I most comfortably tell stories. I am always thinking about the response of the actor, because I trained first as an actor, and being an actor trains you very, very well for, is this going to work on stage? Acting is action. So when I went to school for playwriting, was writing plays in Iowa, a play is just a series of actions, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it's nothing else but that. So I am always thinking, as an actor as well, is this going to be engaging for an actor? So I kind of play this double role, actor, playwright, as I'm writing a play. But I don't have to think about it, because it's just, this sounds silly, but it's kind of innate. Like I've done it a lot, and I've been thinking that way since I was very young, since I was kind of a teenager, really. So it's an easy way for me to think. It's actually much harder for me to write screenplays, because I have to not think in terms of language, and I have to think in terms of imagery, or, stage direction, and like where the camera is. And that to me is not natural at all, to think in terms of imagery. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
No, I really think it does. And
Yeah.
the other thing, sort of piggybacking on that question, is as you're writing a play, not necessarily from a dialogue standpoint, but just from a storytelling standpoint, do you ever, or did you at once have to struggle with the concept of, can someone make this play happen? Is it possible to stage this play?
Yes. So that's a conversation that people have in the theater all the time. Impossible stage directions,
Yeah.
right? But what's so beautiful about the theater that you learn over time, being a theater artist, being a person who studies performance, is that you can do anything on stage. A friend of mine is directing a very famous play right now, Eurydice by Sarah Rule. And there's tons of impossible stage directions in it, stage directions that can never really be done. Like the world explodes open into 1,000 beautiful pieces and falls from the sky. Like, how do you do that?
Right.
Well, the beautiful thing about theater is we know it's not going to happen, but how are you going to create imagery that speaks to us metaphorically and becomes those things, right? The work of the actor, well, we were just saying that the work of the actor happens a lot in dialogue, but most actor training is fiercely physical,
Yeah.
right? I was trained in a physical, for physical theater, and actors are athletes most always, and they're interested in doing things with the space that subvert your expectations of what space can do. So all of a sudden you're on the ocean, right? And you're going to know you're on the ocean because lights are going to change. There's going to be some kind of set movement. Maybe there's going to be different sounds. There's going to be music. And then the actors are going to use their bodies to tell you a story. And so you don't have to be in the middle of the ocean with a camera and freezing, and you don't have to be there. You can instead be in a black box theater, and we're going to believe that you're in the ocean. The theater has no limitations. It really does not. The limitation is your imagination and what you can do in terms of design. And designers are, they're thank God for designers. I am not a designer. They really are, and they make it all happen, right? they make it happen, but not literally, right? Somehow it happens and it's all metaphor, and yet oh, we're on the ocean now. Because of lights and some kind of movement, and there's fabric and the way that the actors are moving, right? And that's actually partially why I love the theater so much, because it isn't always so literal. I find that a lot of media, I love media.
Sure.
Later tonight I'm probably going to watch a movie. I love it. But it's so dependent on realism.
Yeah.
Really is, right? It's deeply dependent on realism. And film is inherently related to realism. They kind of were invented at the same time. They came to be in the same historical moment, but the theater is ancient and is much more has a maybe deeper relationship with epic poetry, the Iliad and the Odyssey, than it does with film. So that is an aspect of the theater that I really enjoy, as an artist.
Well, I was reading a play by John Patrick Shanley. What was it called? Out West. It's in his Welcome to the Moon collection. It's older play, but it's one of those things that you just said, where the cowboys in the play, in his pre-play descriptions, he's like, their guns should not look real, and in fact, it's probably better if they just use their hands and pretend like they have guns.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, it kind of blew my mind, because I'm not, a stage play expert or playwright or anything. I'm learning, but that concept of just being just pretend like they have guns. Don't even give them anything. Just have their fingers.
Because that doesn't really matter.
Right.
Right? It's not about the props.
Right.
Right? It's not about any of that. That's not the core action of the story. And it isn't really dependent on realism. So Shanley there, he's a genius.
Sure, yeah.
Is experimenting. What can I do? How can I tell this story in a way that kind of subverts the expectation of realism? Because we don't want to, it doesn't all have to be completely literal.
Well, it's so exciting to me to think about, not even just in his play, because like you said, he's a genius. So it's one of those things where you're like, okay, yeah, we get it, John. You're a genius. But just the idea of being like, listen, you know what a gun looks like. Everyone in here knows what a gun looks like. The story's not about that. Like you said, it's not the props. That's such an exciting concept to me, to be able to tell a story and just be like, yeah, they're in a car. Every one of you drove a car here. You know what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously. Yeah. They're in a car, whatever. It's such an exciting thing. Man, maybe that's elementary level, playwriting, but it's so exciting to me to think about that.
Yeah. The theater, I once, one of the most influential plays in my history that, remembering great things that I've seen in the theater that changed me, was a play called One Flea Spare by Naomi Wallace. And I saw it done when I was in acting school. It was done at Boston University, and it was incredibly formative. And it's a play in which a bunch of people, this is pre-COVID, by the way, many years before, it takes place during the last great outbreak of the bubonic plague in London in 1666. And it's about a bunch of people who are they've been nailed into their house with boards. This is what they did to make sure that people that they wouldn't continue to spread the plague. If it was around you in any way, you were nailed into your house for 28 days. And so it all takes place in this house. And the way that the designers did it was they created this house, but it was made out of string, right? So there's these wires, so it's a house, but we have to see inside of it. Right. How are we gonna convey that it's a house and they can't get out, but you have to be able to see everything that goes on inside? Oh, string.
That's so
right.
Cool.
String creates a square type house, but you can see inside. But it just suggests the walls of the house on all sides, the shape of the house, and then you can see inside. And I remember that kind of blowing my mind. And then the play itself, for other reasons, her use of language and imagery is incredible. But yeah, I mean, design, that's the joy of the theater, right? If that kind of stuff excites you, then go sign up for, some community theater stuff or theater course, and start kind of, thinking outside of the box a little bit in terms of how to tell stories in a different way.
Yeah. The other stuff that you've written, you've written a play about Medusa called Medusa Undone. You wrote one about an alien invasion called Speed of Light, which
yes.
I'm probably about right in the middle of reading, and very much enjoying it. You wrote a feminist retelling of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Indeed.
All these things, very, very powerful visually. From a writing standpoint, because I got to screenplays first, that hit me when I was pretty young. But a thing you hear a lot is don't direct on the page, don't direct in the screenplay. Is there a similar, is there a similar worry for writing a play? Or, and this is another sort of question, I guess, kind of nestled in this one. When does the writing actually stop for the play? Because you can do rehearsals and you can almost, even like earlier you were talking about, the lights and the fabric and the ocean coming to life. And I guess that's more theoretical, but the idea of like the writing is still taking place as you're doing rehearsals, because all of these other people are helping turn the writing into its like next version. So 2 questions. Is there a similar worry about directing on the page? And when do you think the writing is actually done for a play?
Wow. This is like such questions. They're so big. Okay. So the theater is inherently collaborative.
Yeah.
And in the theater, the playwright is kind of a figure who is deeply connected to the play. And that isn't really so in film. Film is a little bit more, and by a little bit I mean a lot, is a lot more death of the author centric. The writer is kind of is very, very secondary to the director. And that is not true in the theater, or at least it should not be. And if you're a playwright listening and you're like, wait, the director doesn't let me hang out, then contact the guild right away.
See, I wondered.
So yeah, the thing about theater is that it is not created in isolation. You can't make it alone. So I sit and I write a script, right? And then I will get actors and a dramaturg who is essential. A dramaturg is essential, someone who really understands where to cut, where to expand, what to really kind of nosh on, right? And read it. Then you go back and you rewrite, then you read it again, you make a pot of chili and invite a bunch of people over. You read it again, and then you talk about it and you rehash. And then only after, I would say, 3 rewrites, do you go into rehearsal. And you have to be there. And the way that I think about rehearsal with a director is that we're equal, is that we're co-directors and co-playwrights, essentially. From that moment on, I sit next to them, we talk. She tells me this isn't working. I tell her, I don't know about that moment. It's not quite what I'm visualizing. She helps me see where I have not done my job. And I help her see my vision, because this vision is mine, right? And she helps me kind of hone it for the first time. Now, this is not true for published plays with dead playwrights, right? That's not, then the director kind of takes the reins. Of course. But if you're workshopping new work, I am rewriting in the room with the guidance of the director and the dramaturg, and they are helping me realize they have more spatial awareness in general. I mean, directors are really good at like, this is going to look this way, and you're going to want people here, and we're going to want levels and all that stuff. That's not where my MFA is. That's maybe someday, but not right now. So I do not stop writing a play for quite a long time. Even, generally we freeze 2 weeks before open, but because the actor, we got to be respectful to the actors. I mean, thank you, actors, right? We got to be respectful to them. They go on. I'm still rewriting for production number 2. Then production number 2 happens. The script is in a great space. I come in. Maybe I even make a couple of more changes. I mean, I've had many, many productions of the Aurora Project, and I still tweak that play all the time. All the time. Same thing with Speed of Light, although I haven't had a production of that one in a while. But I would tweak it. I totally would. And, I mean, there's stories of great play of Tony Kushner tweaking Angels in America during the Signature Theater production in 2009 with Zach Quinto and not Tobey Maguire, the other Spider-Man. What's his name?
Andrew Garfield.
Andrew Garfield, yeah. He was tweaking that, like sitting in the back, like tweaking it, right? It's like, dude, like, it's really good.
Yeah,
you don't have
it's
to. It's Angels in America.
Leave it alone.
But he's still doing it, and playwrights can do that because we own our work forever.
Well, I also think the thing that I've read that helped me generate that idea is I've read other playwrights talk about, I went to rehearsal and this line falls flat, this line doesn't sound natural. It just flies in the face of the other editing advice that you always get, which is like, put it away, take your hands off of it and just let it go and let it be. And the idea that you can continually hone it because it's a living
thing. It's live. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I do want to emphasize, don't obsess over one project for too long, right? Be writing other plays. Absolutely. Write your play, put it away for a while, make your pot of chili, invite over your actor friends, read it, maybe tweak it a little bit, write a new play, right? Like, don't be obsessed over one project for too long. I think that's also a trap. But I think there's a danger in being like, it's done. Yeah. I think that oftentimes what separates the men from the boys or the women from the girls is that the playwright who's willing to go into that rehearsal room and kill some darlings, right? And kind of see what's working and not working, and to face that and to do some serious rewriting and some serious thinking about structure. And those are the plays that get the development opportunities that are produced essentially on some level.
Sure.
Of course there's things that happen, there's blips everywhere, but the skill of rewriting in the room, that's what you go to graduate school to learn how to do, or at least that's kind of my graduate school experience. What is it like to be in the rehearsal room, to keep honing your work, to recognize it's not the only play that you have in the pipeline of your artistry, but for this particular play at this moment, it is time to buckle down. Now, it takes less time to write a play than it takes to write a novel, right? You might write the rough draft of a play in a couple of weeks or a month, right? But plays take years to write because it's not just that rough draft. It's going into rehearsal. It's here having several readings and then rewriting and being in rehearsal and honing and honing and honing, and then going to the rehearsals of the second production and honing and honing and honing. And then maybe it's done, and that's, a couple of years later. So that's my experience, and that's how I write. There are playwrights who don't write that way, but that's how I do it.
So do you think there's any value? Well, obviously there's value in the act of writing, just full stop. But the value in writing a play where you say, okay, I'm going to write this play and I'm not even going to try to get it staged. I need to get this story out of me and see what happens. I guess for me, the step between writing a play and then having someone stage it, whether you're the director or someone else is the director, I'm trying to wrap my head around the value of a play that you're writing that never gets staged. And if it feels unfinished.
Yes.
Always.
Well, okay. So let's back up just a little. Yeah. The theater is a live medium of storytelling, and it is the actor's medium. So I do not write plays for any other reason than to have them performed. I don't write a play thinking of publication. I don't write a play thinking that I'm just going to send it to people to read on the page. In fact, I don't want them to read it on, I mean, I do, but like, I don't
Sure.
really want them to read it on the page. I want them to come to the theater and see it on stage. And really, interestingly, that's how I know that I'm a theater artist, because I'm not thinking of like the other stuff. I'm thinking of opening night.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of the audience, and that relationship between the actors and the audience and the magic of the liveness of theater is why I know, first, that I'm a theater artist, and then second, that the medium of playwriting is the right medium for me to be writing in. Is it great to have a play published? It's divine, right? Like, it's wonderful, right? But I want them to be done.
Yeah.
On stage. And I know, when people tell me that they've read my plays, I'm always like, oh, that's great. But immediately I'm like, they've missed so much.
Well, I love reading screenplays and stage plays, and I love reading, first of all, but I also, I had someone one time give me a script. Hey, will you read this? Yes. Okay, I read it. What'd you think of it? Oh yeah, it was good. Like, oh, that's all you thought about it? I'm like, yeah, but it's not the finished thing. This is a step towards the thing that you're trying to make. It doesn't matter how good this script is. It is not the thing. The movie Michael Clayton, I only bring it up because I just was reading the script earlier. I think it's a perfect film. The script is nowhere near as entertaining as like 2 minutes of the movie, because it's just impossible, which is why the concept of like, okay, I wrote a play. It hasn't been staged, but it exists. So it's technically not finished. Like, it's not the thing, and it can't ever be as entertaining as the play would be. It has to be staged, because that's why it exists.
Yep. And I'm thinking about some performance scholarship that is somewhat well known, but it's funny because like, and when it's not being performed, at any moment that it's not being performed, like none of my plays are being performed right now that I know of, and like, so they're all kind of dead, like they don't exist in this moment, right? They don't exist. And that's very different than like a book, which like it kind of always, or rather it doesn't exist when you're not reading it, right? It's the act of reading it that kind of brings it off the page and makes it, you kind of create a world in your mind. And for every moment that your play is not being done, is it dead?
Yeah.
Does it not exist? Is it done? Right, that's why it's so, like, I don't know if the play is done. I have to see it again. You know what I mean? Like, I have to be at the theater to tell you, is it done? And maybe I have had moments where I feel like, yes, it's done, right? Oh, I actually felt that way about Speed of Light at one point. And then I saw another production of it. Different actors, different designers, different theater, different director. And then I was like, oh no, it's not done. Right? So like, you can, like, it's all dependent on that moment in the theater, the liveness of that moment with that particular combination of actors and director.
Yeah.
Which is why, like, the question is like philosophically, it's kind of a philosophical paradox, So.
Which is a great thing that theater can be. I mean, I'm sure there are philosophical paradoxes or paradoxi, I don't know what the plural is, for film. But theater, there's just so much. There's just so much going on. One thing I was curious about, if you have had this experience, is if theater is defined in a lot of people's minds, or even just people that you have encountered throughout your life, by the art forms that it's not. That people are like, well, yeah, but it's not a movie, and it's not a book, and narration. There's an actor who maybe turns to the audience, and that has seemed to be my experience growing up. But also I grew up in essentially a cornfield that playwriting was not a thing anyone really cared about. And it always seemed to me like somebody was like, well, why would I want to go see a play when I could go see a movie? Which was upsetting to me, even as a person who was not like insanely into plays. Has that been your experience or no?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because I think that a lot of the population feels that way, but no, because I've been around theater people since I was very, very young.
Yeah.
So like a little kid, I was put into essentially I was taking acting of some kind from the time I was like 13 and doing plays from the time I was like 6. So yes, I've heard this as well. I've definitely heard this. And sure, I think that if you feel that way, then it's true for you.
Yeah.
But I would just kind of gesture towards the fact that theater came first.
Yeah.
Theater is the first imitative art form. Theater is probably about the same age as the cave paintings, right? We're talking about like, when did the first caveman get up and like imitate the chase for the buffalo and like what happened, right? Like, so that is probably about as old as the cave paintings of the buffalo being chased. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same thing. One is imitative, one is imagery. And so like to to say like, why would I want to go? It's like, okay, sure, there's technology now, but you have to concede that prior to the technology of film, television, and radio, this I mean prior to the 1920s, the theater was the most popular form of media in the world, right? Like that's what you did after work.
Yep.
Like, people went to like, no, I'm serious. Like, people went to the theater 3 times a week, right? Like, how often do you watch a movie? Twice a week, right? And you would go to the theater instead. That's what people did for fun. 100%.
I was reading an Orson Welles biography, and there's a couple pictures in there of the premiere of his, I think it might have been Hamlet or Macbeth, I can't remember which one, but the amount of people in front of the theater, it is like it is like a giant film premiere like you would see now. There's just like hundreds, maybe over 1,000 people trying to just get a peek of what's going on.
And plays, does theater reach as many people as film and television? No. Right? And it never will. And like, there's a lot of conversations about that. Should we be filming these things and putting them up on platforms so that people can access theater, so that theater can become accessible? I mean, I think that one of the major problems with the art form is accessibility.
What's your thought on that, filming and
I'm 100% for it, right? National Theater Live. That's what they for many years they didn't. They wanted to keep this separation between what's film and what's theater. But now it's like post-pandemic, it's like there's no good reason to keep doing this, right? There's absolutely no good reason. Have an amazing filmed version of the play and a platform upon which all the Broadway plays, you can buy them and watch the filmed version. It's still a play, right? You're watching it on the stage.
I would subscribe immediately.
I would subscribe. I mean, I have some subscriptions, but like, yes, like, there's a teaching tool. I'm a professor of theater and theater performance, and there's a teaching tool called Digital Theater Live. You can't access it unless your institution has it. But I will admit to you that I sometimes go on there and I'm like, what can I watch?
Heck yeah.
Like, the Crucible from, the David Armitage. Oh God, what was I think that's his name. David Armitage did a version of The Crucible on West End several years ago, maybe 2014 or something. It's an amazing production. Like, why would I'd rather watch that than like a lot of like shitty movies on Netflix.
I found clips I think the West End has a YouTube channel, and I just found like 3-minute clips, and I was like, what? Are there whole plays on here? And no, there's not.
Yeah, there's not. But there's a lot of like discussion about that now. Like, can we make theater more accessible so that people can see the really awesome things that happen in the theater? Why would I see a play instead of going to a movie or watching television? It's a really good question. It's a really good question post-pandemic. My initial response is to go back to that idea of subversion, right? Like, the theater isn't always going to be literal, and the stories told there might make you look at storytelling through a more artistic lens.
Yeah.
And it is an art form that has continued to evolve even after the invention of technology. I mean television was literally if you go back and you look at like the very first like ads for TV, they were very pointed in like wanting to kill theater, right? So if you think about the live studio audience, it's a theater.
Yep. Well, that's theater.
Right? Like live, like the laugh track and like people watching, it's supposed to look like a theater, and it was supposed to in many ways replace the theater. And it's set up that way for a reason, because they got this great idea. Well, what if we could bring it to you through the television? Of course, it didn't kill theater. Theater will never die. It's been dying for 2,500 years, but that, it won't happen. It would continue to evolve. And film too, like, film is very young, right? Film is a little over 100.
Barely, yeah.
And yeah, you know what I mean? It's a very, very young art form, and it has so much incredible potential. And so much is going to happen, and like I concede that of course, but I don't think it means that this other art form that does other things has to kind of disappear because of it. Right? They're different.
Well, wrapping up, I'm super excited that I found your stuff and to see all of the things that are possible, especially as a sci-fi fan. To find sci-fi plays was a thrill for me. I was very, very excited by that. So let's say someone is a writer, hasn't ever written a play before. How would you suggest to them to, rather than just starting, because that's a great way to just start doing it, maybe a way to sort of more purposefully get started writing a play? What's the way you would sort of push them to, or guide them? How about that?
An advice I'd give to someone who wants to write a play.
Yeah.
For the first time. If you know nothing about it, that's excellent. I know it's
100% serious.
100% true.
Yeah.
100% serious, because theater is about imagination, and the impossible stage directions will be dealt with by the designers. And so I won't say just write, although that's what you should do.
It's hard to beat that.
I will say take an acting class.
Okay.
You will learn so much about writing plays. Take an acting class or take an online playwriting class. There are tons of them. Playwright Center has tons of them. You could go to dramatiskguild.com, sign up for a playwriting class. They're all kind of online now. They're over Zoom, and there's always a class to take, and there's always like beginner, like write your first one act, write your first 10-minute play, get the ideas out. So invest in something like that, or invest in an acting class. Go, look at your your little community ledger. There's always like a acting class. Drop in, right? Learn about action, right? Learn what an action is, action, objective, tactic, all these things that that's what acting is. What do I want? What's in my way? What are the tactics I'm going to employ to get what I want? And if you know that, then you just kind of like put yourself in for every character, right? It's like, okay, what does this person want? And then their scene partner wants this, and they're going to fight about it. The reason why I became a playwright was because the mystery of it, like the romantic kind of like at the typewriter, like that whole mystery was totally taken out of it for me because I had trained as an actor, right? For many years. So because I had trained as an actor and I knew all of that lingo and I knew how to think in terms of action, objective, tactic, conflict, moment before, all that stuff, it was like, oh, and so then you just do it for everyone. And so, that's how I became a playwright, because acting and playwriting are they're very close to each other, in my opinion. Now, I do know playwrights who were never actors, and also they're great playwrights, and that's that's a whole other thing. But I would say that if I had never had that demystified, I don't know if I would have started to write plays, because maybe it was too intimidating or whatever, or I thought maybe I wouldn't be able to do it, or never had. I mean, like, who is a playwright? How many playwrights do you know? I didn't know any.
Yeah.
So it was something that came to me a little bit later, when I kind of became late teens, early 20s. So I would say that take an acting class, take an online playwriting class, just start writing. So yeah,
I think those are great pieces of advice. And yeah, it is hard to beat the just start writing because it's so good.
It's hard to beat. It's so good.
I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and come on and sharing some insights into what you do and how you do it. And it was awesome chatting with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was so fun.
And thank you again to you for listening to this. Again, don't forget, go to bellapoynton.com. You can even go to bellapoynton.com/plays to see a list of Bella's plays, which you can actually read on a website called New Play Exchange. So make sure you check those out. Thank you again to Bella for chatting with me. It was a ton of fun. I could see that we definitely could talk about Star Wars for a lot longer than we did. So I, as you heard, cut that a little bit short. But maybe again, we'll have Bella on and chat about Star Wars, sci-fi, and some more playwriting as well. Swing by my website, austinrwilson.com. Follow me everywhere you can find me online if you so choose. Like, subscribe, do all those things. Write reviews and recommend the show to other people. It really helps get it in front of people and helps me to continue to do this. February is going to be a busy month for me, so keep your eyes out for more interviews. We'll see you then.